All right, so it is finally here. We have in this series gone through everything you need to know before building a computer, picking out all the different parts, what the different parts do, and finally we have all the parts to build a gaming computer. We have our case, our motherboard, our graphics card, our power supply, our processor, our case fans, our CPU cooler, our SSD, and our RAM, and we are ready to go through how to actually assemble this thing now that you have all of the parts. So that's what we're going to do in this video. If you haven't seen the other videos in this series and you're a first-time computer builder, those are super helpful. So I'm going to link that playlist in the description below as well as in the cards right up here. So be sure to check those out before you get started on this video. It's going to be a ton of fun. Let's dive into how to do this. All right, to start this build off, you're going to need the following components. You're going to need your RAM, you're going to need your SSD, you're going to need your CPU, and you're going to need your CPU cooler, and then of course your motherboard, because everything plugs into the motherboard. And so we're going to start with the motherboard and we're going to plug everything in, and that is how we're going to start this. What we're going to do first is I'm going to install the RAM. Typically people install the CPU first, but I'm just going to install the RAM. I'm actually going to open up this manual right here, and this is going to tell me where to put the RAM in which slots. It says what the RAM slots are. So you have A1, A2, B1, B2. So we'll want to install it in the second and the fourth slots is where we're going to want to install the RAM. So this slot and that slot is where we're going to want to install the RAM. So I'm going to install this. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take the RAM slots and we're going to pop this open on the side here. It looks like the second and the fourth was already popped open. So we'll pop open the second and the fourth, and you have this little notch here. Let's see if you can zoom in on that. We have a little notch in the middle, and that's going to line up with the notch here in the RAM slot itself. So you just want to make sure that that notch is lined up, and you slot it down into the memory slot. And you're going to want to push with some force until you hear a click. Just like that. So that's securely in there. So now we have the RAM installed. Now the second thing that we're going to want to install is our SSD. So we have this 500 gigabyte SSD from Western Digital. So I'm going to go grab my screwdriver and screw this into the M.2 slot. All right, so it looks like there are two spots that we can install our M.2 drive. The first one is this Hyper M.2 right here, and then the other is just this normal M.2 slot over here. I'm thinking this is the one that they want us to install it on because it has the different lengths of the M.2, because we could install it one that's only this length from here to here. You can install one that's from here to here, or one that's from here all the way over to here. So this is probably the one that they want us to install it on. That's going to be the one I want to install it on, even though it looks like it would reach for this one to have this Hyper M.2, but I'm just going to go ahead and install it into this one. And so now we have our M.2 SSD installed right here. So now we got our RAM in, we've got our SSD in. Now we want to install our CPU. So you're just going to pull this out. You're going to want to hold it mainly by the sides. You don't want to touch any of the pins right here. And the way we install this is we just take this little bar over here, we pull it to the side just like that, and we let this come up just like that. Now, right here on our CPU socket, which is where we're going to put it, you have this little triangle right here in the corner, which matches up with a little tiny gold triangle right there. You can barely see it, but that's what we're going to want to match up with that corner on our CPU socket. So just make sure that that little gold triangle is lined up right with that little L. Just want to make sure it's slotted in there correctly. And then you push down, you will feel a little bit of pressure, and you slot that thing in, and now you've installed your CPU. All right, the last thing you're going to want to install on your motherboard is this cooler. So this one is significantly larger than what came in this small box, because this is just the cooler with the two fans attached. So we're going to want to install this now, and this is going to go directly over our CPU right there. All right, so here we have everything for our CPU cooler. We have the CPU cooler itself. We have two different styles of mounting brackets, one for AMD, one for Intel CPUs. We're going to be using this one because we have an AMD CPU. You have the instructions for installing the cooler, which we'll use here momentarily. And then here we have some thermal compound, some thermal paste. This is the one thing that we didn't go over purchasing, but you will need it. This is what transfers the heat from the CPU to the CPU cooler, so it can transfer the heat up here and dissipate throughout your system. So you will need this, but a lot of the times either the cooler comes with thermal paste pre-applied or it gives you thermal paste. We did buy some extra thermal paste just in case we needed it, but it looks like we technically don't need to. I'm going to use the thermal paste I bought because it's from Noctua, and Noctua I think is just probably going to be a better brand than this Phanteks thermal paste, but it'll probably have actually really similar results. So we are going to install this CPU cooler. The first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to remove these fans from the heatsink, since in order to bolt it in I have to bolt those screws into the motherboard, and I can't do that with these fans still on. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to remove these screws here. This is for the retention plate, it looks like, and so we're going to want to get rid of these guys. Now you are going to want to be careful with this because on the back, on the back of the motherboard, you have this back plate, and this is what holds your motherboard or your heatsink to the motherboard. So you're going to want to put this guy back on. It says two different holes, and I'm slotting mine on the inside hole, so this side instead of this side. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to apply thermal paste to the CPU die, and then we're going to want to apply or mount the actual heatsink. So let's go ahead and do that now. Like I said, I got some Noctua thermal paste. This is what I'm going to be using. Just kind of pop off the end here, and you squeeze about between a rice grain sized and a pea sized. Probably somewhere about there. That might even be a little bit too much, but that should give us some pretty decent coverage. And then this has a little plastic thing here that we're going to want to remove. So we remove that, and then we mount this guy. And again, we're going to tighten one side down a little bit, tighten the other side down a little bit. All right, and now the CPU cooler is attached. So the last thing we're going to want to do before we switch over to the case and start putting things in is we are going to want to attach the fans to either side of the CPU cooler. So these fans have some directional arrows that tell us that the air is flowing this way. And so we're going to want to make sure that when the fan is installed, that both fans are pointing in the same direction, preferably towards the back of the case. Let's go ahead and hook these fans up. So this is going to go to, let's just say CPU fan 2. Go ahead and plug this guy in here. It'll only go in one way, so you can't mess this guy up. go ahead and tuck the fan cord in just like that, so you can't see it too much. Then our other CPU fan is also gonna route the cable down here, just so it doesn't look too bad. Other CPU fan is gonna go right there. Now we have the CPU fan all hooked up, and we are ready to stick this assembly into the case. All right, so this guy is our case. We're gonna end up putting the motherboard in here. Everything is gonna go inside here. This is gonna plug into the motherboard. What we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna first remove these screws that hold in the side panel. And we're gonna set that aside. And I'm gonna disassemble the case a little bit more just so we can see everything that we're doing. So this front panel usually comes off. Let's turn it upside down. And there's a little slot here. Just pop that off right here. And we're gonna flip this over to the other side, and we're gonna remove the other side panel, which has, making a lot of noise here, has these thumb screws right here. Slide back and then lift off. And now you can see the internals of the case. This is very open, makes it really easy to work with. And this is how we're gonna work with everything. So let's undo these cables a little bit here. Free the cables. This comes with, turns out it's got a, oh man, an expansion slot protector, along with a lot of case screws. I don't know if they plan on having us mess up, but that looks like more than enough to attach the motherboard to the case. I'm actually going to remove this fan because we got a bunch of white LED fans that are going to illuminate the inside of here, and that'll look pretty cool. But you'll notice that we have a bunch of standoffs here, and this is where our motherboard is going to sit. Now the first thing we're going to want to do when installing the motherboard though is the motherboard comes with this. This is the rear I/O shield, and we're going to just open this guy up right here. This is a pretty cheap one. You might have an I/O shield built into your motherboard if you got one of the fancy ones. But what we're gonna want to do here is we're just gonna wanna pop this in the back slot here and give it a little bit of pressure to make sure that everything slots in correctly. Let's see here. Yep, got that there. Boom, boom, got it. So that's now secure. I'm going to remove this fan now. Now here we have the motherboard with the CPU cooler attached, and that I/O right here is going to slot into the back of the motherboard, or of the case right there. And hopefully we have enough standoffs that we'll be able to bolt this thing in. So you're just going to carefully slide this thing down in here, and then you're going to want to see if we can get a good look here. You're going to want to make sure that everything lines up just right like that, and push it through a little bit so everything pops out the other side. So you don't want any pieces of metal obstructing using your USB ports. That would be sad. And we've got a couple of different kinds of screws here. One is a coarse thread, one is a fine thread. Let's see if we can get this in focus. One's a coarse thread, one's a fine thread. We're gonna wanna put the fine threads in and the coarse threads, which are kind of this chunkier back than the finer threads. We're gonna wanna use those for the power supply later. So right now, we just take this guy, extend my screwdriver a little bit. We're gonna find where those motherboard standoffs were, and we're just gonna screw them in. All right, so I have put 6 screws in, and I probably won't need any more. That's gonna hold up just fine, as you can see. Nothing's gonna fall out like that. So now what we need to do is we need to start connecting everything we can to the motherboard. And what we're going to start is we're going to start with all of the wires that are inside the case. We're going to route these through the back and we're going to put them inside the motherboard. So let me flip this guy around. All right, so all of these things are labeled. So this says USB on it. I don't know if you can see that, but it says USB. This says HD audio. We've got a couple of little thin ones here. This one says reset switch. This one says power switch. This one says HDD LED. So, and then this one says power LED plus, power LED minus. And then the last one that we have here should be our front I/O. So this is USB 3. So all of these are going to need to go inside the motherboard. And so we're going to want to locate on the front where these go and plug them in accordingly. So this USB 3 plug is going to go right in here. So this guy can only go in one way. So we're going to plug that guy in just like that. Gonna route this guy up right here. And this guy can only go in one way as well. Slot that guy in. Sorry, it's probably hard to see. That guy goes in right there. So the last cables we need to route are these small guys. And I'm gonna consult the manual to figure out where we plug them in. And that's gonna go in the bottom. So next to the HDD, we're going to plug the reset switch, the power switch, and then the last one we're going to plug in, the power LED. That guy's going to go right there. And then we're just going to pull these guys back on through to make sure that they look nice and tidy. We are good to plug in the fans and then plug in the power supply. So let's go ahead and install the fans. All right, so here we have the fans. They're by Corsair. The way this is going to work is the side that the sticker without all the information on, this is going to suck air in, this is going to blow out. So this is where the back of the fan is going to be, this is the front of the fan, and sometimes, yep, just like this one, the fan rotates this way, just like the arrows on there that says, and it blows air that way. So we've got the case fans installed now. We've got the back one here. We've got two up front here, and we've got two on the actual CPU cooler itself. The next thing that we're going to want to install is the graphics cards. I'm not a huge fan of the orange highlights, but that's just me. I was going for a really clean build, but this will do just fine. So like I said, it's in a really pretty decent condition. Here's what we're going to do here. This graphics card is going to slot in this first PCI Express slot. So we're going to want to move that out of the way. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to just pop this guy out right here. I want to take off this protective casing right here. And then we're going to want to open up this PCI Express slot and then just slot this guy right in there. When you press it down, everything should slot in just fine. Now the final thing that we're going to want to do is, you can see that this is still going to be moving around a little bit, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want any wiggle there. So we're going to take the motherboard screws that this thing came with, and that is a lot more secure. Now the last thing that we're going to want to install is the power supply, and the power supply is going to go right in here. All right, my friends, so now that we've got the power supply screwed into the back of the case, we have a couple of cables that come pre-installed on the power supply, because this is a semi-modular power supply. So this one, this really big one, is going to install directly into the motherboard, and this smaller one is going to go into the graphics card. And let me show you where those are going to plug in, so we can get a pretty good idea of where to route these things. So the motherboard connector is going to go right in here, mounting to this big Chungus connector, and then the other 6 or 8 pin cable is going to plug directly into there. And so the way I think I want to route these is just the motherboard one right in through here, and frankly that's probably where I want to route the GPU one as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, possibly a total fatal flaw, but what I did, because I should have checked all my cables and gone through all of my reminders, is this right here is a 6+2 pin connector coming from the power supply, and I was trying to use a 4+4 pin connector, which is this guy right here, which is supposed to plug into your CPU, not your GPU. That could be very, very bad. I don't know, I've never done it before. And now the last part deals with cable management. So we have kind of all of these cables out around back, and we've got some twisty ties that Sama provided us with. And so we're gonna use those, as well as maybe some of the twisty ties that came with the other products as well. And we're just gonna make this look a little bit neater. That is probably going to be about as good as we can manage the cables. Now, it's best practices to, before we power this thing on, or to before we put the front plate back on and the side panel here, it's good practice to just plug it in and make sure this thing posts. So you're going to want to install a Windows installation media, put that in the USB drive, hook it up to a monitor, and see if this thing boots up. There it is. Moment of truth. That's normal, that it shuts down a little bit and then it reboots. That's just a system check. Let's see. Just thinking about it. Good news is I didn't break the graphics card. That's still going. Oh, there it is. Nailed it. All right, my friends, there you have it. Everything you need to know about building a PC. We have completely assembled everything in this computer, which is super cool. I really like that these Corsair fans have this really subtle light to them. They're just nice white LED. And I feel like the case and everything about the PC goes really, really well together. And the best part is it's super quiet. I was not expecting this PC to be this quiet, because I've got another PC that has Noctua coolers, which are supposed to be really, really quiet, and man, these just blow it out of the water. These are near silent. Even in totally silent conditions, I can barely hear them. So that's really, really cool. Be sure that when you're building the PC, that you make sure that your 6-pin connector is plugged into your graphics card, and your 6+2 pin connector, and not your 4+4 pin connector, because that goes to your CPU. So hopefully this was useful to you. If it was, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.